One,
Two, three, four.
You think Teletubbies was just a harmless kids show about colorful aliens playing in a field? Nah, fam. That innocent BBC program that parents use to calm down toddlers was actually hiding some seriously disturbing secrets that are going to completely mess with your head. But what if I told you that everything about Teletubbies would, from the setting to the characters to those creepy baby faces in the sun, was designed based on psychological experiments and theories that had nothing to do with children's entertainment? I'm talking about a show that was created using actual scientific research into child psychology, behavior modification, and even some theories that border on mind control. The producers weren't just making random decisions about bright colors and repetitive dialogue. They were following specific protocols designed to influence developing brains in ways that most parents never realized. I've been digging through BBC archives, interviewing former crew members who finally broke their silence, and what I discovered about the real purpose behind Teletubbies is going to blow your mind. We're talking about government funding, psychological testing on children, hidden messages embedded in seemingly innocent episodes, and a fictional world that was actually modeled after disturbing real-world locations. The creators weren't just entertaining toddlers, they were conducting the largest uncontrolled psychological experiment in television history, and the results were so concerning that several child development experts tried to get the show banned. The final revelation about what Teletubbies was really preparing children for is absolutely terrifying. The psychological programming hidden in plain sight. Let's start with something that's going to make your skin crawl when you realize it. Teletubbies wasn't randomly designed. Every single element of the show was based on documented psychological techniques used to influence and control human behavior. The bright colors, repetitive dialogue, and hypnotic music weren't just kid-friendly choices. They were scientifically calculated to put children into a trance-like state where their minds would be more susceptible to programming. Here's what the show's creators were really doing. The constant repetition of words and phrases wasn't just helping with language development. It was using a psychological technique called semantic satiation to break down children's natural critical thinking abilities. When you hear the same words over and over again, your brain stops processing their meaning and just accepts them as background noise. This makes viewers more passive and compliant. But here's where it gets absolutely twisted. The show's format was directly copied from interrogation and brainwashing techniques used by military psychological operations. The combination of bright lights, repetitive sounds, and simple commands is exactly what intelligence agencies use to break down resistance and implant new ideas in subjects' minds. The Teletubbies themselves were designed to represent different personality types that children would identify with and want to imitate. Tinky Winky was the follower, Dipsy was the rebel, Laa-Laa was the people-pleaser, and Po was the innocent. Children watching would naturally gravitate toward one character and unconsciously absorb that character's behavioral patterns. The most disturbing part? The show's educational consultants included experts in childhood behavioral modification who had previously worked on government projects involving psychological conditioning. They weren't trying to teach kids, they were studying how effectively television could be used to shape young minds and create predictable behavioral responses. Child psychologists who analyzed the show's impact found that regular Teletubbies viewers showed increased compliance with authority figures, reduced questioning behavior, and heightened susceptibility to suggestion. The show was literally making children more obedient and less likely to think critically about what they were being told. But here's where it gets darker. The real-world location that inspired Tubby Land. The sinister inspiration behind Tubby Land This is gonna blow your mind, but Tubbyland wasn't just some whimsical fantasy location. It was actually modeled after a real place that has connections to some of the most disturbing psychological experiments in modern history. The rolling green hills, underground bunkers, and isolated setting weren't random creative choices. They were deliberately copying the layout of facilities used for mind control research. Here's what really happened. The show's location scouts and designers visited multiple government research facilities and psychiatric institutions while developing the Tubbyland concept. They were specifically studying environments that had been used for sensory deprivation experiments, isolation studies, and behavioral conditioning programs. The underground Tubby home, with its perfectly round rooms and lack of sharp edges, was directly inspired by sensory deprivation chambers used in psychological experiments during the Cold War. These facilities were designed to disorient subjects and make them more susceptible to mental programming. The Teletubbies' living space recreated these conditions, but disguised them as cozy and welcoming. But here's where it gets absolutely horrifying. The specific location where Teletubbies was filmed has a dark history that the BBC never disclosed to parents. The Wimpstone area in Warwickshire had previously been used as a testing ground for chemical weapons during World War II, and later as a site for classified government experiments involving psychological warfare techniques. The rolling hills that looked so peaceful and innocent were actually contaminated with decades of chemical residue from weapons testing. Several crew members reported feeling disoriented and experiencing memory problems while filming on location, but these incidents were covered up and attributed to exhaustion. The most twisted part? The show's creators deliberately chose this location because they believed the residual chemical contamination would enhance the psychological effects they were trying to achieve in young viewers. They thought that children watching scenes filmed in this environment would unconsciously absorb the same disorienting effects that had been used in military experiments. Environmental scientists who later tested the filming location found traces of chemicals that were known to affect brain function and cognitive development. The BBC quietly stopped filming at the original location, but never informed parents that their children had been watching content that was potentially contaminated with mind-altering substances. But that's nothing compared to what they were hiding in the characters themselves. The disturbing truth about the baby son and voice commands. Okay, this is where things get absolutely terrifying. The baby son that giggled throughout every episode wasn't just a cute addition. It was actually a sophisticated psychological trigger designed to activate specific responses in children's developing brains. The baby's face and laughter were scientifically engineered using research from studies on infant attachment and maternal bonding. Here's how twisted this really was. The baby son's face was created using composite imaging of multiple real infants, specifically chosen for facial features that would trigger maximum emotional response in toddlers. The giggling sounds were recorded using techniques developed by researchers studying how infant vocalizations affect adult behavior and decision-making. But here's where it gets really disturbing. The baby son was programmed to appear at specific moments during episodes when children's brains would be most receptive to suggestion. Child psychologists discovered that the timing of the baby's appearances corresponded exactly with moments when viewers would be entering light hypnotic states due to the show's repetitive patterns. The voice commands embedded throughout each episode weren't just helping with language development, they were using neuro-linguistic programming techniques to implant specific behavioral responses in young viewers. Phrases like big hug and again weren't random cute sayings. They were carefully crafted commands designed to increase children's compliance and desire for repetition. The most chilling part? The show's audio engineers admitted that they embedded subliminal messages in the background sounds and music that were below the threshold of conscious hearing. but could still be processed by children's developing auditory systems. These hidden messages contained instructions for behavior modification that parents never knew their children were receiving. Analysis of the show's audio tracks revealed patterns of low-frequency sounds that matched brainwave patterns associated with suggestible mental states. The Teletubbies weren't just entertaining children, they were literally altering their brain chemistry to make them more receptive to external control. Former BBC employees have revealed that the network received complaints from child development experts about the show's psychological effects, but these concerns were dismissed because the show was generating massive profits from merchandising and international licensing deals. But the most shocking revelation is what the show was actually preparing children for. The real purpose: creating the perfect compliant generation. Wrap your head around this. Teletubbies wasn't just a children's show that happened to use psychological techniques. It was actually part of a larger social experiment designed to create a generation of adults who would be more compliant, less questioning, and easier to control by authority figures and media manipulation. Here's what was really happening. The show was funded not just by the BBC, but by government agencies and research institutions that were studying how early childhood media exposure could be used to shape long-term behavioral patterns in entire populations. They wanted to test whether television programming could be used as a tool for social engineering on a massive scale. The techniques used in Teletubbies were based on decades of research into mass psychology and behavioral conditioning. The goal wasn't just to entertain toddlers, it was to fundamentally alter how an entire generation would respond to authority, process information, and make decisions as adults. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. Follow-up studies of children who were regular Teletubbies viewers showed concerning long-term effects that persisted into their teenage years and adulthood. These individuals demonstrated increased susceptibility to advertising, higher compliance with authority figures, and reduced ability to think critically about media messages. The most disturbing part? The psychological profiles of Teletubbies viewers matched almost exactly with the characteristics that marketers and political strategists consider ideal for manipulation. These individuals were more likely to accept information without questioning, more responsive to emotional appeals, and less likely to seek out alternative perspectives on important issues. Government documents that were declassified years later revealed that Teletubbies was considered a successful prototype for using children's entertainment as a vehicle for population-level behavioral modification. The techniques developed for the show were later adapted and used in other programs, advertising campaigns, and even political messaging. The show's creators have since admitted that they knew their work would have lasting effects on viewers, but they believed they were conducting important research that could be used to create a more peaceful and cooperative society. They didn't anticipate that the same techniques could be exploited by less benevolent forces to manipulate and control people. The most chilling revelation: several of the psychological experts who worked on Teletubbies later expressed regret about their involvement when they saw how the techniques they developed were being used to influence elections, promote consumer behavior, and suppress critical thinking in media audiences. The legacy of Teletubbies isn't just childhood nostalgia, it's a generation of adults whose cognitive development was fundamentally altered by exposure to sophisticated psychological programming disguised as innocent entertainment. So which part of this theory disturbed you the most? Drop it in the comments and tell me if you watched Teletubbies as a kid. Subscribe if this completely changed how you see children's television. And remember, sometimes the most innocent-looking shows have the darkest purposes.